Hi, everybody. I, too, would like to take a few seconds to recognize the contributions of a few people. First of all, Charlotte and the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. Part of my job is to interface between Queen's Park and federal government vis-a-vis the interests of Ontario. And I can say that Northern Ontario does not have a fiercer defender / advocate than Charlotte Robinson. It's a pleasure to work with her, and you are incredibly well served. So thank you, Charlotte. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Ian McCormick, who is with Tetra Tech and is also the vice chair of the board for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and frankly has been agitating for this file to be a priority for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for the last 3 to 4 years. So to you both, thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our sponsors as well, the Center of Excellence for Mining Innovation, Doug Morrison. Really is, his organization is helping us spread the word across Ontario about this important economic development for Ontario. Also to the Ontario Clean Water Agency. And the reason why you actually have hard copies in front of you to take home with you for your evening reading pleasure, as it were, is because of Hatch. They underwrote the cost of the printing of the report, which wasn't cheap, let me tell you. This was working a second ago. It really was. Oh, there you go. I got it. It's called the on button. It's a new innovation. It's a new thing. It's, okay. So I introduced myself. I'm Josh Harrison. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Government Relations with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. I've been with the Chamber for about 1.5 years. And when I joined, I was tasked, very simple task really, was to make the Ontario Chamber the most reputable voice of public policy vis-a-vis business in Ontario and in the country. And it was I very quickly recognized that we had a huge potential to, on this Ring of Fire piece, to actually broaden awareness. The Ring of Fire is, I don't need to tell you, but I'm going to anyway. It is 5,000 kilometers square, 330 kilometers from the nearest road, crucially, and with vital deposits of gold, platinum, copper, and most importantly, chromium. It has the 4th largest deposit of chromium in the world. Now, we had 3 explicit objectives for this report. The first objective was to start a principled conversation. Now, in fact, I just did some media right now, and one of the comments was, we've been talking about the Ring of Fire for 5 years. What's the holdup? And that conversation, I think, has been principally driven in the north. The conversation isn't as far as long as it needs to be in southern Ontario. We want to drive a conversation about what the Ring of Fire is and its potential for Ontario. A second explicit goal is to look at the Ring of Fire through an ROI / return on investment lens. I fundamentally reject the position that the Ring of Fire is simply just another infrastructure play for government. It is not. It is a return on investment, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. We also wanted to identify an action plan and accountabilities vis-a-vis that action plan. What do we need to do in order to get this development moving forward? And more importantly, we adopted a lens that was very much focused on capturing as much out of the value add for Ontario, so that benefits do not leak outside of Ontario. Capture as much of the value add as possible for Ontario. Now, those are the 3 explicit goals, and I'll tell you what I think are 2 implicit goals. The first is we really want to do for the Ring of Fire what the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers did for the oil sands. About 15 years ago, they released a report that identified that the oil sands just isn't an Alberta play. It's a whole of Canada play, and therefore must be a national public policy priority. They were very, very successful in driving a national conversation. That's our goal with this piece. We want to drive the conversation this isn't just a Northern Ontario play. This is a whole of Ontario play and a whole of Canada play. That is our goal with this piece. A second important objective is we think that a crucial variable that it has slowed the development of the Ring of Fire and slowed progress, as it were, is a lack of basic understanding. Basic understanding across Ontario. We know that you know about the Ring of Fire and its potential, but in Toronto, in Windsor, there isn't broad knowledge, hardly any knowledge at all. We actually tested it through a survey that we did. Practically no one is aware of the potential. And we think, again, a crucial variable slowing down the progress is a lack of understanding, particularly in Southern Ontario, and therefore a lack of bottom-up pressure on our political, government, and all the players, if you will, in this space. Our goal is to create that awareness and create that bottom-up pressure so we can finally get moving on this piece. So here's what we did. We did an economic analysis. We did a multiplier analysis looking at the GDP impacts, the job impacts, and the government revenue impacts. We did an optimistic versus conservative scenario, and we also looked at the direct, indirect, and induced impacts. Now to do this, we assumed the multiplier analysis, very acceptable but conservative, 1.5. So that means for every dollar that's generated, there's another 1.5 generated elsewhere in the economy. We also assumed a leakage of 25%. That is, 25% of the benefits will be leaked, will be dispersed outside the province. We also, again, undertook a optimistic versus conservative scenario in a 10-year versus 32-year time horizon. Now I have to tell you that many of we due diligence the heck out of this report. We put, really, it was peer review on steroids. And some of the comments came back that this really, you're optimistic is wildly conservative, right? We just base it on the 5 known potential developments. There is potential, much more potential in the Ring of Fire, but we decided for just empirical purposes and also rational purposes to err on the cautious side, if you will. We also ran consultations. Tim in Sudbury, here in Thunder Bay, I recognize Rosie from the conversation we had about, I think, 8 months ago, something like that. The Ontario Economic Summit, we also conducted over 50 plus one-on-one interviews. And I have to say, I have to acknowledge Ian McGinty at the back of the room here. He actually drove the research side of this process, so thank you, Ian. So I'm going to refer you to page 10 and 11 of the report. You won't be able to read this, so I'll refer you to page 10 and 11. So we looked at again, a conservative scenario that assumed really only the two big development projects. We calculate that the total GDP impact would be about $7.7 billion. $7.7 billion in new economic activity over the first 10 years of development. And with that comes 4,600 jobs. Now we know that the jobs in this sector are relatively well paid. So those are 4,600 relatively well paid jobs sustained annually as a result of the development of the Ring of Fire. We also looked at the 32-year time horizon, and conservatively, we estimate $21.6 billion in new economic activity. Now this is important. It's important because you all know the story. Ontario is struggling right now. Many areas of traditional strength, such as manufacturing, etc., are facing real challenges because of the dollar, where it's at, because of competition from low-cost jurisdictions such as China and also southern U.S. We need to focus our attention on those investments, those areas where we can be world leaders. And this is such an investment, such potential for us. We also looked at an optimistic scenario, so total impact over a 10-year period. Optimistic, on the optimistic side, is about $9.4 billion in new economic activity and 5,500 jobs sustained annually. Okay? Over a 32-year time horizon, optimistically, we're looking at $25 billion in new economic activity. We also, I'll refer you to page 12 now. We also, it's not enough just to apply simple GDP analysis, etc. What are the potential spin-offs for other industries? And so we looked at, based on well-founded economic principles, well-founded formula and approaches used by economists around the world, We expect about 66% of the benefits to be accrued directly to the mining sector. We also expect other sectors to benefit substantially, particularly the finance, real estate, and rental and leasing business. About $1 billion in economic activity over a 10-year period. We also, other industries benefit, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. Importantly, a lot of these industries are dispersed across the province. On page 15, you will see government revenues. And this is a crucial piece here. So if you look at tables 9 and 10, we expect conservatively that government will rake in about $1.8 billion over the course of the next 10 years as a result of this development. Now, that's important because we expect the cost of infrastructure to be about $1.7 billion. So within a 10-year period, government could realistically, in a conservative scenario, expect a return on its investment. Okay? That's important. And I think, again, reinforces this is not just another infrastructure play. Okay? Optimistically, again, we consider very close to $2 billion over the first 32 years. In the longer term horizon, we expect the governments to earn about $6 billion through taxation, etc. And again, most of the plurality of these benefits will actually accrue at the federal level. And I think that's really, really important. We're nonpartisan. We don't have to involve ourselves in intergovernmental conflict, etc. But I think it's really important as we look to look to the levels of government, we would expect investment from both levels. Now, the one thing that we were really interested in doing is actually disaggregating, looking at the benefits of the Ring of Fire from a regional perspective, Southern Ontario versus Northern Ontario versus Eastern Ontario, etc. For lots of reasons, it was very difficult to do this in any sort of reliable way. So what we did is we just basically on pages 16 and 17 talk about the regional dispersion of the mining sector. We do know that the plurality of firms, mining sector firms, are actually headquartered in the GTHA. We do know that 17% of the salaries accrued in mining are accrued in Southern Ontario. We do know that 40% of all mining capital is raised through the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange. This just isn't a Northern Ontario play. And so it's nice to say, well, these are the benefits. The question is, what do we do about it? And so we've identified what we think is a Ring of Fire action plan. And so I think you'll see a little summary of that action plan at the very front of your paper. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, except to highlight a few key items. Now, if you look at, if you accept, and I've seen a lot of heads nodding, it could be because you're falling asleep, or it could be because you agree with me. If we look at this through an ROI lens, a return on investment lens, right, it actually changes the discourse around what is the role of government versus what is the role of the private sector. Okay? We need to land the plan. We need to land the infrastructure plan, and we need to finance that plan. I'm not going to stand here and say I expect government to pay for everything. That's not a reasonable principled position for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to take. What we will say, though, is that government needs to be a player, and we need to see hard investments made from both levels of government. Okay? We need to capture as much of the value add. And again, if you adopt an ROI lens, we need to capture as much of the value add process in Ontario as possible. We need a hard conversation about energy prices, and we need a hard conversation about what we're prepared to do as a population, as a public, in return for, again, the smelters, et cetera, et cetera. We need to drive that question. There needs to be a very public conversation about public analysis on what an energy subsidy would mean and what it would cost. We also need to address Aboriginal community needs, and I think one of the reassuring things that we heard from our at the launch in Toronto that we had last week is that the private sector is very much interested in partnering and partnering in new and innovative ways. In terms of number 6, making the Ring of Fire a national priority, we again, our view here is that the federal government has to at least match provincial investments. Number 7 is creating awareness and tracking progress. Our CEO, Alan, one of his favorite expressions is what gets measured gets done. And we commit to an annual report card against all these objectives that we identify. So this is the progress. I'm going to release that report every year, and we're going to communicate the heck out of it as a way of generating real pressure on key players, not just government, all the key players, and towards moving this thing ahead. This stage, I would like to acknowledge the fact that we weren't alone in this effort. In fact, we had the collaboration and the time of many great minds, many great thinkers on this issue who are very concerned about the Ring of Fire. I'd like to acknowledge again Doug Morrison, who's here, Ian McCormick, who's here, and Charlotte Robinson. They've been with us throughout this process, providing crucial advice and helping us steer down a virtuous path. So thank you all for volunteering your time. At this stage, that's it. I'm done. At this stage, I'd like to hand the mic over to Doug Morrison, who again, his organization has underwritten our road show through Ontario. He is a formidable advocate of the Ring of Fire and has been a fabulous partner throughout this process. So at this stage, Doug, I'd hand the mic over to you. And I'd also ask our panel members to come to the front of the room, please.